Hey everybody, I'm recording this video for both of my sections of MMJ 2331 Intro. Some of you will have already heard the basics of this and are just watching it to finish it. Some of you are hearing this for the first time. Either way, feel free to watch along. Okay, so here's this. We're talking about AP style, which is a really important fundamental part of learning the basics of journalism. But before we get into it, we need to know, what the heck exactly is AP style? Why does it exist? What is it? Okay, so the story begins here. It begins with a company called the Associated Press. They're the ones who make the book and publish it every single year. They are what we call a wire service. They hire reporters and they send them around the world and around the United States to cover stories. They are in all of the countries around the world for the most part. They are spread across the United States. And what they do is they report on stories, and then when the stories are done and finished, they sell the stories or sell access to the stories to be published by other publications. So if you're a newspaper, you ultimately can buy a story from the Associated Press. Now, why would you do this? If you were a newspaper or if you were a news website, why would you buy access to other people's reporting? Well, it's oftentimes because it's reporters who you wouldn't necessarily be able to pay to go certain places. It's cheaper oftentimes for you to hire or to buy access from the Associated Press than it is from you to pay a reporter full-time to go, for example, stay in the state capitol. Now, nowadays, really what it means is that they sell subscriptions. So the Associated Press will sell a subscription to a website where they list all of their news stories, and then you get to pick and choose which ones you want to publish. Two things to note here. One, it's important to realize that the Associated Press is not its own publication. It's not a news publication that is printing its own stuff. They are reporting on stuff. They're reporting on what's going on around the world and then selling that content to other newspapers, news websites, television stations who need access to it. Also, the phrase nowadays is in the AP Style book. They have about 2,200 reporters, by my best count, that are across the world covering news events. The reason why the AP Style book came about, or AP Style became a thing, is because you have all of these thousands of reporters all reporting on different events going on around the world. They needed to make sure that everybody's on the same page. They needed to make sure that the reporter that's in Tajikistan is covering the world about the same way and writing things about the same way as someone who is in Atlanta. It all has to be standardized so that when, let's say, you're a newspaper and buy a subscription to the Associated Press, you know the quality of what you're getting is going to be the same regardless. So in 1950s, we get the Associated Press Style book. The first one costs $1 and is about 30 pages long. And then every single year since then, although in the beginning they met every other year, but for the most part, every year, the Associated Press gets together and discusses changes they want to make to the AP Style book, and then the changes get made and a new one gets published every single year. Even if we don't want them to, they still keep on going. And the book contains standard formats for stuff like ages, addresses, dates, numbers, stuff where lots of people can get in the habit of writing them in different ways. What this does is standardizes it. A reporter in Tajikistan will write ages and addresses and dates and numbers the exact same way as a reporter in Atlanta. There's also special sections in the book, for example, if you are really into sports or writing about food and cooking or business. These special sections are dedicated simply to terminology and to word formatting involving those special topics. So, for example, if you look in the food section, you will find out that the word corn dog is actually 2 words. So if you ever are writing a story about a corn dog, you know that corn dog is not 1 word, it's 2 words. So let's go over a handful of the most common AP Style rules. The ones that you'll have to look up the most, that you have to reference the most. Let's go over them and make sure we're all on the same page. Let's start with numbers. Here's the rule for basic number usage. Any number that's a single digit, so 1 to 9, you will spell out. You'll write out using letters. Any number that is double digit, so 10, all the way up to 999,999, will use Arabic numerals, or numbers as we know them. So, for example, in the sentence, all 8 members of the commission voted in favor of the tax increase, which will impact about 50 local businesses. The number 8 is typed out because it is single digit, so we are using EIGHT. We are spelling it out, whereas the number 50 is using Arabic numerals or numbers because it is double digit. Now, what happens once we get past 999,999? The answer is that we use a number to indicate the amount, as in 1, and then we do a space, and then we write out the indicator for how much it is. So million, billion, or trillion. Notice that it is 1 space million, 12 space billion, 5 space trillion. I don't know what comes after trillion. I think it's quadrillion. I would have to go look. If you start off a sentence with a number, though, it has to be written out no matter how big it is. So anytime you have for example, like something like 4 members of the commission are expected to change their votes after pressure from citizens, it doesn't matter if that is 4 or 40 or 400, you will always spell it out because it is beginning a sentence. Let's move on to ages. Ages always use Arabic numerals no matter what. You will always use a number. Now, that always is not always, because sometimes if you ever were to start a sentence off with an age, you would actually have to write it out that way. That brings us to one of the most important and really frustrating parts about AP style, is that there's always an exception to every single rule. So, for example, the woman who is 34 years old was awarded the trophy, as opposed to the 5-year-old boy was lost for nearly 3 days in the woods. Now notice the similarities. Both of these use numerals. Even though 5 is a single-digit number, we still use the Arabic numeral 5, or Arabic number 5 for 5-year-old boy because it is an age. Now notice the difference in hyphens. The difference is talking about compound modifiers, which is actually something if you remember from our basic grammar conversation. In this situation, 5-year-old boy, if we look at it that way, 5-year-old is directly compound modifying the word boy, so we use hyphens. However, if we say the woman who is 34 years old, that means that the setup of 34 years old is not directly compound modifying the word woman anymore, meaning we don't use hyphens. You can also offset ages and commas after someone's name if you don't want to deal with it. So for example, we can say, police arrested the man, 22, for fishing without a license. If we do it this way, it's clear to the audience that we're talking about age, so you don't have to say years old. Next is dates. Here are some basic rules for dates in the AP Style book. Months are always capitalized, and sometimes they're abbreviated. However, you only abbreviate a month if you also have a calendar date. So you only abbreviate it if you are talking about a specific day that goes along with it. So the basic example is this. The event is scheduled for August 29. If it's delayed, it will take place in September. Notice that because we have the calendar date of 29, August 29, August is abbreviated AUG period. Now the specific way to abbreviate each month is in the AP Style book, but it also follows logic. AUG period for August, OCT period for October, DEC period for December, etc. Notice that the 29 does not have a TH. It's not 29th. It is simply 29. In AP Style, we do not use the little TH subscript or superscript after the number in a calendar date. Now, that means that you abbreviate months that have a calendar date. You don't when they don't. However, there are certain months, March, April, May, June, July, that we never abbreviate even if we have a calendar month. We call these the short months because the words for them is actually quite short, and because abbreviating them would create some sort of confusion. And conveniently, in the calendar, they're all right next to each other. Now for days of the week, we're going to write out days of the week. We will never abbreviate them. As far as I know, this is one of the only AP Style rules that doesn't have an exception. We will never abbreviate days of the week. So the example, the town hosts a block party on the first Friday of every month. Friday is capitalized, capital F, and is written out Friday. Now we'll get into the specifics of when to use days of the week versus when to use calendar date and month later. That'll be a later conversation, but for now, just know this is the basic AP Style rule. Also in this term, if we're talking about years, you only really need to use years if we're writing outside of one calendar year forward or one calendar year backwards. And if we do that, we offset the year with a comma after the calendar date and month. So we would say, for example, man first stepped on the moon July 21st, 1969. If we're talking about just a decade on its own, though, it was one of the defining moments of the 60s, we would write 60S. Notice we're not treating it as a possessive. There is no apostrophe there. In news writing, we will never, ever, ever use yesterday, today, or tomorrow. We will never use morning or afternoon or something like that. The issue is, if someone reads a story today, if someone reads a story right now, the word today is going to mean something completely different as if they read it a month from now. These are vague words, and we simply have no space for them in journalistic writing. We need to be more specific than this. Let's move on to time. Time is pretty simple. Time we use, if we have minutes, we use a colon, and then either way, we always have a space and either A dot, M dot, or P dot, M dot. Always use AM or PM, always with periods, and we use that to indicate if we're talking about morning or evening. So we say the meeting will start at 6:30 p.m., 6:30 space P dot, M dot. Notice that even though 6:30 p.m. is ending the sentence, we don't have an extra period at the end. The dot that ends the time also ends the sentence. It was originally scheduled for 5 p.m., but was delayed because of technical issues. Here we don't have a specific minute, we just have 5 space P dot, M dot. All time will work this way. All time will always be treated the same with 2 very limited exceptions. You can say midnight and noon. Midnight and noon. And you can use those in place of 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Let's talk about addresses. Addresses are some of the more frustrating rules in the AP Style book. And here's the thing. I hate this rule, and every single journalist in the entire world hates this rule. You have to look it up every time, and if it's something that you can't remember and you have to reference in the book, don't feel self-conscious. This rule just kind of sucks. Here it goes. You will only ever abbreviate avenue, boulevard, and street. And you'll only abbreviate those when you have a house number. So avenue, boulevard, and street are the only ones you will ever abbreviate. I try to remember it as ABS or Anti-Lock Brake System. That's just kind of how I remember it, but your mileage may vary. So, if I drove to 2202 Donaldson Street for the party, notice that because we have 2202, which is the house number, the street in Donaldson Street is abbreviated ST period. However, if we're just saying I drove to Donaldson Street for the party, we don't have a house number, and therefore we write out street. It'll be the same thing for avenue and boulevard, and it is abbreviated AVE period and BLVD period. It's only those 3. All other forms, all roads, courts, circles, lanes, everything else is always spelled out, never abbreviated. Number-named streets will follow the basic number rule. So meaning that we park on First Street. First is a single digit, so we would write out first. However, if it's 10th and up, it is 10th street. So we park on First Street versus park on 10th Street. Also, if you live in an area with directional indicators, you abbreviate those when you have a house number, but only when you have a house number. So the difference is he lives on Southwest 16th Boulevard. Southwest is our directional indicator. However, we would write that out if we don't have a house number, but when we do, if it is 1108 Southwest 16th Boulevard, because we have 1108 as a house number, we abbreviate Southwest SW. And we can abbreviate them that way, no periods, SW, NW, etc. Now let's talk a little bit about money, everyone's favorite topic. Money is pretty straightforward in the AP Style book. You use a $sign and you use the amount of money. So if I say the watch was valued at $500 in 1990 and has only gotten more valuable with time. Notice there's no space between the $sign and the numbers. And also notice that we don't use the word dollars. We don't say $500. The $sign acts as the word dollar, so we don't have to write the word dollars. Just $sign will work just fine. We say something like a $100 investment in the company in 1900 would now be worth $17 million. This is once we get past $999,999. We follow the same rule as numbers in that we use a $sign, a 17, space, and the word million. Let's talk about titles. Titles are one you're going to have to deal with a lot in media writing, no matter what you're doing. Also with public relations, this comes into effect a lot too. So the first rule in dealing with a title is simply just to make sure that you're dealing with a title and not an occupation. So for example, a plumber, the word plumber is an occupation. However, if it's the chair of the local 912 Plumbers Union, that's a title. Occupations are the job itself. Title is the designated name of the position within that occupation. And determining the title structure for AP style involves two very crucial steps. The first is looking at how many words long the title is. If the title is 3 words or fewer, you'll put it before the name. If it's 4 words or more, you'll put it after the name. And then that brings us to step 2. If it's before the name, it is capitalized. And if it's after the name, it's lowercase. If you can follow those basic rules, you'll be good. So the example here would be something like President Calvin Coolidge. The title is President. President is 1 word, so therefore it goes before the name. And because it's before the name, it's capitalized. Interim Athletic Director Dave Coolidge. Interim Athletic Director is 3 words, which is the maximum amount it can be, but still fit before the name, so it's before the name. Because it's before the name, it is capitalized. And finally, Greg Coolidge, Assistant Secretary to the County Dog Catcher. Well, Assistant Secretary to the County Dog Catcher is way more than 3 words, so they put the title after the name. We offset it with a comma. Notice there's a comma after the last name, and it's lowercase because it is after the name. That has an exception, of course, because everything does. Proper nouns are always going to stay proper nouns. So if you're writing about Eagle Scout is a proper noun, is a brand name that is trademarked by the Boy Scouts of America, so it'll always stay uppercase no matter where you put it. States. Used to be back in the day you had to abbreviate state names after cities. It was super annoying and everyone hated it. So finally they have changed it, and happy day it is for us. So you don't have to abbreviate states, and you also don't need to write out the state if you're in the city, if the city that you're writing in or the city you're writing about is in the state you're currently working in. So for example, you all right now are in the state of Georgia, meaning that any Georgia city, you don't have to write out the word Georgia afterwards. But if it's another state, you do. So the example sentence, the business announced it is relocating from Biloxi, Mississippi to Savannah. Biloxi, Mississippi, you would write out Mississippi because the city of Biloxi is in Mississippi. However, you would not have to write out Georgia after Savannah because you are currently in Georgia writing about this story. Academic degrees. These are talking about stuff like, you generally only need to mention someone's academic degree when it's part of an overall story. So if you need to establish their credentials or their degree is what the story is about, you include it. You don't just include this for any old source for any reason. The story needs to be about this. But if you include it, you can include bachelor's degree or master's degree. If you write out bachelor's degree or master's degree like that, you have to use a possessive. So it is BACHELOR''S, degree. And notice that it is lowercase. However, if you use the formal name of the degree, such as in 2016 they earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Communications. Notice in this situation it's not possessive anymore, but it is capitalized. So capital B, capital A. This would be the same as Bachelor of Science, Master of Arts, Master of Science, etc. Individual majors in a university. This is something that will come about when you are doing a lot of reporting on campus. Individual majors are lowercase unless they're already a proper noun. So something like Smith, originally a business major, decided to switch to English. Business is a word is not uppercase because it's not a proper noun. English is because it is a proper noun. Year titles, stuff like sophomore, junior, freshman, senior, etc. Those are all going to be lowercase unless they start a sentence off, like the word sophomore is here, and are not generally considered titles. So you wouldn't say something like sophomore Bob Smith. Sophomore is more a year designation than it is a title. And finally, a very small handful of word choice stuff that we didn't get to in the last class, but is still super important for us to talk about. So stuff like toward and towards. These are a word choice issue. Well, this one's relatively easy because toward is a word. It means moving in the direction of something. The word towards with an S is not a word, so never ever use it, ever. The difference between beside and besides. This could be something like the difference between actual word usage. And this is the word beside, meaning you're physically next to something. Beside is physically next to a thing. Or, for example, your seats are beside ours. Now, besides with an S is a metaphorical concept of comparison. So if I say, that's besides the point, that would be besides with an S. And finally, since and because. This one is really common in media writing, and it's easy to mess up. Since refers to the passing of time. So it's been 26 years since the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. Because is an action occurring as the result of another action. It's cause and effect. So the example there is, that's because they have not been very good. Don't get these two mixed up. They will be points off if you do, because they mean very different things, even though we colloquially use them as the same thing. So there we go. In 20 minutes in about 20 minutes, we have gone over the basics that you need to know for AP Style in order to be successful in this class. Now, this is not every single AP Style rule ever. This is simply the very early basics so that as you're working on your early assignments in this class, you know what to look for. And I look forward to seeing you guys in class next week.